silent, we hear the dog.
Yeah, which we won't. We'll all be talking the whole time. There we go. All right. All right, we're getting started right now.
All right.
Okay.
Here we go.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Wild and Precious Optimal Living Show, the show dedicated to increasing your health, your adaptability, and your resilience of you, your family, your friends, and everyone you love. I am your host, Dr. Sam, with my wonderful co-host,
Dr. Lynn, and this is a show where we have candid conversations. And today, we're super excited to be able to have two special guests on our show, Dr. Mike Kehoe and Kelly Codell. And Dr. Mike Kehoe is a biotoxin illness expert, as well as he practices, he's a PA as well as PhD, and he works with functional medicine with Sound Clinic. And we have Kelly Codell, who's a patient of Dr. Kehoe as well too, and she's also a Lyme support advocate. So we're really grateful to be able to have both these wonderful members on the show today. And our show is brought to you by Shed Light Cold Laser. Dr. Sam, would you like to tell everybody about it?
Yes, Shed Light Cold Lasers, the cutting edge company when it comes to cold lasers. As we talk about them every single show, we are so grateful to have them as a sponsor, so grateful to use them in the office. The results that we see with them is really second to none, and like we say, any tool is only as good as the knowledge that backs it up. And this company backs it up with a team of experts and clinicians that guide you every step of the way to help you use it to its absolute best ability. Shed Light Cold Lasers.
Awesome. So we are, as we had talked about today, we want to be able to start to open up a conversation that I don't think that there's a lot of outlets right now, or it's not a conversation that's commonly seen in mass media. And so we want to be able to open this up from our show, where we have Kelly Codell, and we want to be able to bring in two perspectives, from the practitioner perspective with Dr. Kehoe, and then also Kelly's perspective from her journey of healing from Lyme disease as well as mold exposure. And so we wanted to be able to give you a story behind this. So Kelly, tell us a little bit more about how your journey was like before you started working with Dr. Kehoe. And you personally have been diagnosed with Lyme and mold exposure. So can you tell us a journey before, what that looked like before you started working with Dr. Kehoe?
Yeah, so I had been sick for about 6 years before I got diagnosed with Lyme, and then about a year later when I got diagnosed with mold and started working with Dr. Kehoe. Before going to Sound Clinic, I think I was kind of stuck in what a lot of patients get stuck in. I had no idea what was wrong with me. I had all these random symptoms. I had always been a very healthy person, and then all of a sudden my body just started fighting back, and so far as I knew, for no reason. And I was going to a bunch of different doctors. I mean, I think that's one of the big problems with the way that our medical system is set up, is when you have a lot of different types of symptoms, when you have a systemic type illness, whether it's mold, Lyme, or some other type of infection or toxin, it affects everything. And you go to a different specialist for, I had an eye problem, so I went to an eye doctor. I had problems with my feet, so I was going to feet doctors. I had back surgery, so I went to a back doctor, and nobody connected that this was all related. And me not knowing what I was dealing with, I mean, I had no idea, right? You show up to the doctors and you kind of think they were going to know. So it was a 6-year, very hard journey with a lot of random, unexplained symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. So what started you, so I know that you were undiagnosed for 6 years before you started to really figure out what direction truly was really helping you and understanding your Lyme disease as well too, and what shifted for you when that helped you redirect how you were supporting yourself or healing?
Yeah, so I mean, it took me a few years to really realize that the Western medicine way, and not to say that I don't do any of that anymore, because I certainly do, but to start looking at a more holistic type approach. And people throw out the word holistic, and to me, it really has a lot of meaning and whole person. So I started to really consider my whole health, not just the random ailment of, oh, my back hurts, but what could potentially be causing that, and what other types of things could potentially also affect that. And I started with a naturopathic doctor who diagnosed my Lyme and then directed me toward going to some specialists at Sound Clinic, of whom Mike is one. So yeah, it's really changed my life.
I understand then how you started working with Sound Clinic was specifically for Lyme first, right? And then over time, someone had introduced, the doctors were starting to, like, what if you had mold? And in one of our conversations, you had talked about how just the acceptance of mold exposure was difficult. What was that? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I just thought the idea of mold inside my body was ridiculous, right? Like, somebody says, oh, you have mold. And I almost imagined, like, do they think I have a little tree growing inside my lungs? Like, that's silly. Like, of course I don't have mold inside my body. And even more so than that, to me, thinking about it in what I thought was logical, what harm could mold really do, right? Like, and I wanted to, and I'm sure I did at times say, like, hey, I am a really sick person. Like, there are really some true problems with me. Silly mold, if that's a thing, I'll deal with it later. Let's deal with this now. Talking more about the Lyme and whatnot, almost as though mold was secondary, and certainly not. I mean, it amazes me. It really amazes me now, knowing just how sick mold can actually make you. It doesn't seem like it would, but I can tell you from experience, it is a significant illness and a significant hurdle to get over.
Yeah. And what do those symptoms, what are some of the things that show up for you that maybe we might not necessarily think that it's a symptom of mold, but for you, what was that like?
A lot of brain fog, and just kind of forgetting what I was doing, almost feeling hazy, sometimes even dizzy, to the point where I'd have to go lie down for a half hour or an hour. Definitely fatigue is a really big part of mold as well. So I would say there's a lot of brain and mental type components that go with it. For me, also, it caused a lot of GI issues. So a lot of bloating, a lot of gas, whether it's constipation, diarrhea, like, it definitely affects your GI. I was getting a lot of yeast infections, which for women, that is a very common sign of what mold can create, is a candida overgrowth, and that's kind of how it shows up. And then you kill the candida, and then you end up with bacteria overgrowth, and just this constant battle going back and forth in your gut. So again, the symptoms are kind of all over the place. And not necessarily, unless you know that they're connected, you wouldn't necessarily think that they were connected.
Yeah, it's very systematic, and we don't realize that. And it sounds like the combination with Lyme and mold together, it's not a distinction between the two. Sometimes the symptoms can be Lyme and mold together, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to differentiate because they are both systemic and they both go everywhere. Yeah. So, anywhere that your blood goes, both Lyme and mold will appear. So a lot of heart problems, a lot of respiratory problems, a lot of brain problems, GI, I mean, you name it. Inflammation is a really big deal, joint inflammation. Whether it's in your wrists or your ankles, that is also a very common symptom of mold.
Wow. Well, Dr. Kehoe, I mean, you're a specialist, and you've been working with patients who have mold exposure for quite a long time, and deep experience here. Can you maybe describe to our audience what really exactly is biotoxin illness, and what does that look like clinically too that you see?
Sure. Well, biotoxin illness is kind of comes from environmental medicine, where a lot of conventional medicine may not be focusing as much on what are the impacts of things in the environment on you. They'll be looking at cardiology, they'll look at pulmonology, but but many times diagnoses are made and treatment is symptomatic, trying to treat the symptoms of whatever the diagnosis is, as opposed to looking for underlying root causes for what might be occurring. So biotoxin illness will encompass, Lyme disease, many of the co-infections, so Bartonellosis, babesiosis, Ehrlichia, anaplasmosis, a lot of tick-borne infections. Last count, I think there were 23 different pathogens that ticks can carry, although it's my opinion, and I think many of my colleagues as well, that these aren't just passed by ticks. I think any biting insect has the potential to transfer a lot of these pathogens to the patient. But then it also encompasses, when you talk biotoxin, it also encompasses obviously toxic mold. We can also get into heavy metals, the impacts of plastics and pesticides and many other toxins that are going to be coming from the environment, whether it be coming from food or living quarters or where you live, your car, wherever you're going to spend a lot of time.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's more common than we realize too, and oftentimes is it something that it gets slipped or overlooked?
Yeah, I think to say that it's more common than people realize is a dramatic understatement. It's extremely common, and again, I think many of the symptoms that are going to be seen. I look at working with kids. Kids have asthma. Well, why do they have asthma? Okay, well, maybe they're allergic to some food allergies, sure, but in my experience, if a child has asthma, we better go look for mold. It's extremely common, I need look no deeper than my own history growing up as a child. I had asthma as I figured things out moving through my career, and then later diagnosed myself with toxic mold. I look back, sure enough, that's where it was. So children that have, that are bedwetters, have enuresis, they have, pediatric asthma. In my mind, we need to go look to see root cause. Instead of just treating the symptom, root cause, what is underneath kind of causing these things? And that's just one example. Environmental medicine covers a lot of bases for a lot of symptoms and diagnoses that are more root cause, trying to fix rather than put Band-Aids, Band-Aid medicine of if you have a condition, what drug can I give you to treat what symptom?
Yeah.
That's fine. I like my patients. I want to help them not have symptoms, but at the same time, I think, every patient, if you ask them, is going to want to figure out, but what is underneath this? Is there something else that we're missing?
Yeah, and so I understand that you had been, you did your PhD in fitness and education, and behind that, what started to help you navigate your own personal experience? I understand too with biotoxin illness as well too, and so really how did this all come together for you as your focus now?
Well, my background again with my PhD was in exercise and human performance, and so I have an interesting perspective as I bring to medicine, because I kind of understand the body from a physiological perspective, sport and exercise, fitness, and so I bring that to the table, as well as nutritional concepts, which all was a perfect segue then for me when I made the decision to go back to school to become a PA. Little did I know I was embarking on a journey that was going to be helping me in just a few years. I literally graduated and began working in a clinic where we specialized. It was the Center for Natural and Integrative Medicine in Orlando, Florida. And I literally diagnosed myself with Lyme disease 4 weeks after starting, with the clinic. I was having strange symptoms. It's like patients, you don't really start making connections. You chalk everything up. Well, it's just this or that. But I was having anxiety and sleep disturbance, test anxiety I had never had. And finally, after seeing Lyme patients for 4 or 5 weeks, my hands started getting tight, and I said, I do not have rheumatoid arthritis. And all of a sudden, then, I describe it as a lightning bolt out of the sky. I finally realized, had the thought that I'm treating Lyme patients every single day. You did have a tick bite 4 years ago that I just conveniently forgot, as many patients probably will, because you get over it. And I had a rash on my rear end, and it was with me for quite a while.
Wow.
And ironically, I got it to go away not from antibiotics, but from using an onion in natural medicine, and literally taping an onion to my rear end every day for quite some time, and got it to go away. And then I kind of forgot about it. And 4 years later, as I'm treating Lyme patients, and I started having the pain in my hands, and I said, it's not rheumatoid arthritis, I know it. then I suddenly remembered the tick bite. Tested myself, sure enough, diagnosed myself with Lyme disease. Treated myself, got much better, and probably about 6 months later, I switched offices within the clinic. And almost immediately from switching offices within the clinic, my symptoms went straight downhill again, and I thought it was the Lyme coming back. Restarted my Lyme protocol, didn't get better this time, and I had been to a conference earlier that year, practitioner talking about if you have patients refractory to Lyme, you better go look for mold. And I knew it. As soon as I had that thought, again, I knew it. And ran the numbers, and sure enough, I was struggling with toxic mold. We drilled a hole through the wall in the office I had just moved into, and unfortunately, the whole back of the wall was just black with toxic mold. And this was in Florida, so needless to say, mold is pretty pretty intense in Florida as well. So that started me down this whole path of, okay, how do I treat not only myself but then patients?
Definitely, can completely imagine and understand that. So with yourself and with other people, what would be some symptoms that they could look for in themselves, for one, for toxic mold, but then two, also for Lyme disease?
Well, and as Kelly alluded to, there's a lot of overlap between these two, and they, in my experience, in the vast majority of patients that I'll see, if I find Lyme disease or co-infections, I will almost always find mold, and if I find mold, I'll almost always find Lyme. And I usually say, I'm sure there's patients out there have one and not the other, but most of the time, by the time they come looking for help, it's usually because the two have kind of tag team and really crashed the immune system. So Lyme disease and mold, both, they can, the list of symptoms that can potentially be attributed to either or is extremely long. But generally speaking, when I'm looking at, what I call the classic 5 symptoms for Lyme disease are going to be chronic fatigue, joint pain, sleep disturbance, brain fog, anxiety. So a lot of, abstract symptoms in many that can be, attributed to many other things. Mold, two key, as I'm doing a history and an intake with a patient, 2 key symptoms that I'm always going to ask are, do you have frequent thirst, chronic, polyuria, nocturia, in other words, going to the bathroom a lot, having to get up in the middle of the night, go to the bathroom, and also an extreme chemical sensitivity. And both of those, there are underlying medical reasons, some hormonal release and detox concerns that contribute to those 2 symptoms being a little more specific to mold. But frequently, again, the patient sitting across from me will have all of that and then some.
Awesome. So then for Kelly, what were you doing before you started seeing Dr. Kehoe and then and then from there, I'd like to be able to see how Dr. Kehoe assessed you to further.
Yeah, so, again, I just thought that mold and toxins were just silly. I just never took it seriously. So I was treating, but the problem was I had a bunch of toxins bogging down my system, impairing my immune system from being able to fight. So I was taking antibiotics and other types of both herbals and prescriptions to fight, but my body almost kind of had this thing holding it back, and that was the mold. So it wasn't until I met Mike and we ran some blood tests, and I'm an engineer, so seeing the numbers and having it quantified that I have inflammation in my blood and it is being caused by toxins, holy cow, how do I get these toxins out of my body? And that's when I started detoxing, and I mean within a couple of months. And mind you, for somebody who's been sick for, at that point, 7 years, okay, to then have it be a few months before I felt like I had almost a big blanket holding me down. And then once I detoxed, I still was sick, I still had Lyme in me, but getting the toxins out, I felt like that huge gray blanket got lifted off. And almost like all of a sudden I was outside in the sunshine again, from being in a dark cave for years. And that's really the best explanation that I could give for somebody who has not experienced this, of the difference. Yeah. So I lived in that darkness underneath that heavy blanket for years. And it wasn't until I got serious about detoxing that went away. And then once that was gone, my body was finally able to fight.
Is that something that you commonly see, Dr. Kehoe?
So, there is no one path with patients. Everybody brings in, I always say I'm not in the cookie cutter business. It doesn't work when you're dealing with functional medicine, especially related to biotoxins. So Kelly's story is not, it's not different, but it is unique. And so what was really wonderful with Kelly is she had done a lot of heavy lifting and treatment, not only prior to our clinic, but with other practitioners in our clinic even before she came to see me. And she can tell you to where she was in terms of openness about mold or not, but that was where we kind of took over. She and I working together to help her was looking at the mold side of the equation and saying, all right, let's get the numbers and let's see what it looks like. And so for Kelly, we used a couple cutting edge modalities. In the clinic, we do muscle testing with something called autonomic response testing, which really helps us kind of assess the body energetically, and it you know, what I always say is it allows you know, the patient's body to talk to me directly. And also, you know, we discussed, as Kelly and I were moving through this, we discussed another modality called laser energetic detox, which is basically frequency testing to match certain frequencies, and then the use of a cold laser to be able to then release these toxins out into circulation. Not just mold toxins, but also heavy metals, plastics, pesticides, a lot of other toxins as well. When we do the full biotoxin evaluation, we're looking at 400, 500, 600 toxins, and trying to evaluate how many are there and then what can we take out. And so for Kelly, what was wonderful was to see, you know, really early on that, you know, the treatments as we were doing the laser detox, like she said, it was like the blanket starting to be lifted off, and then it'll, you know, I always kind of envision it like it's you know, unburdening the liver and allowing detox and other things to kind of take place. So as you're killing Lyme, killing Babesia, Bartonella, you have what could be called a Herx response or a die-off reaction. As you kill those off, the neurotoxins that are part of the normal life cycle can be released at a higher level, and patients can have a die-off reaction. They can feel worse as a result of treatment, so we have to be careful. But I have you know, I get the sense as we worked with Kelly that we were clearing all that out of the way so that as she was doing treatment for these other things, it became more effective. Now, you know, like I said, for Kelly's story, it was Lyme and co-infections, and then we did the mold, and then she went back and finished. For many patients, it can be the exact opposite. You know, we may have to really unburden the body with mold and other toxins first to be, and then many of the symptoms we thought may have been Lyme, Babesia, Bartonella, or whatever, may be greatly decreased because it was the combination of the two. But you know, for some, we have to really lower the burden of mold toxicity and heavy metals and what have you, to be able to then, you know, effectively treat on the other side. So again, it's not cookie cutter. We have to take every patient, you know, as they come and see where they are in their activities of daily living, and sometimes it's, we try one, and if we see we get a good response, we run with it, or if we're like, no, I think we need to switch gears, it really is just, you know, for Kelly and I, or for any patient, we're a team to get them better, so communication's key.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, you know, so there's what Kelly was describing, there was assessments through labs as well too.
Correct.
So a lot of understanding, and it's very different than medical way of looking at labs. I would imagine like blood work,
Sure.
Not your traditional way. What are you really looking at when you're looking at labs?
So, you know, when I look at blood work, and this, you know, as I started this, I've been doing this for close to 10 years now, and as I started, I've learned more along the way. I still have a lot of my root learnings that I continue to use. There are blood work that, you know, blood markers that I can use, cytokines like C4A, TGF beta 1, MMP9. These are inflammatory cytokines, can cause by mold, but can also be caused by some other things, viral infections or mast cell activation. So I've learned to try to take it, you know, with a caveat. There are pretty effective urine mycotoxin panels, right? For example, Real Time Labs and Great Plains Labs GPL Mycotox. They're two different technologies, so they can both be accurate, but it's almost like looking in the front window of a room and then looking in the side window. You may get two entirely different views. Nonetheless, they can both be accurate. And so those are good tools to kind of get a sense of, you know, to what degree is there toxicity going on, and then also from the inflammatory side, what's going on with the immune system side. And then of course, antidiuretic hormone, I mentioned earlier, the frequency of urination. It knocks out a hormone called antidiuretic hormone, so the patients can feel like they're chronically dehydrated, always thirsty. They drink, they pee, they drink, they pee, they drink, they pee.
Wow. Yeah. Kelly, you had something to say too.
Yeah, I really want to add to that also the value of a really good doctor like Dr.
Yeah.
You know, I run a support group now, and I see a lot of people try to interpret their own blood tests. I get bombarded. People send me their blood testing all the time. Kelly, what do you think? Like, hey, Kelly's not a doctor, okay? So, but, and actually Dr. Kehoe was who explained something that, he explained it to me, he probably doesn't even remember, our very first visit, and I have never forgot it. That a lot of regular doctors run normal types of blood tests, and so they have normal ranges, which are very inclusive of a lot of healthy people, because the normal blood tests that everybody run, they have a lot of data on. But a lot of these more specialty blood tests, like he just mentioned, the C4A, the MMP9, the TGF-beta1, you are only testing those things if you are a sick person. So the laboratories have all this data, and they try to extrapolate it out in a statistical model with standard deviations, and then they say, if you're above or below within 3 standard deviations of the mean, then you're an outlier, and that means you're either high or low. And what he explained to me, he has his own levels that he considers high for somebody who, if they are at a certain level, it would indicate illness. And I think that that's a really important thing to consider for anybody who's looking or trying to, a lot of these, you see all these at-home blood tests now and at-home this and that. And then, people are trying to do it themselves and diagnose themselves. And even though you may have something come back that is in the normal range, well, is that the normal sick person range? Or is that the normal of everybody range? And so that was something that he pointed out to me that I think is just important to mention. Especially with the technology and information, we're all Googling everything all the time, but a really good doctor can change your life.
Most definitely. Yeah, that reminds me of something another doc said in terms of when it comes to labs, is really you have your lab values, your lab ranges, like you said, which is they have these statistical models from that, but then you really have your functional ranges of really what certain human beings operate in. And as you said, if you're in that compromised category, then some of these numbers, even though, well, maybe you fall into the range of being healthy, well, it's still not good, and that's why you're still having some of these issues and some of these problems. And actually, I'd love for you to expand on too something we talked about in the conversation in the pre-chat was going to Dr. Google, and really Mike giving you the permission to do that, because I thought that was actually a really great story. So Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be your own advocate.
Yeah.
If you're having trouble, if something is wrong with you, research the heck out of it.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of information. Kind of also to the question that you asked me before about what did my journey look like before I went to Dr. Kehoe. I mean, I changed my diet. That was a huge part, right? If you're eating unhealthy all throughout the day, every single day, and you're poisoning yourself and you're ingesting toxins, a lot of food now has toxins. I had already changed out all my makeup, all my personal care products, to be non-toxic things, because unfortunately a lot of that stuff now too has toxins in it. So those are things that, a doctor can certainly help direct you with, but there's also a ton of information on that kind of stuff that you can get on Google. So I don't think it's ever necessarily bad to get information and to ask questions so that you're an informed patient.
Absolutely.
So you can be your own advocate. But I also think having a partner to help guide you. I had 5 doctors to get better, 5. And each of them had a different opinion on things. I would show the exact same thing to 2 or 3 of them, and all 3 of them would have a different idea of what can we do. So, I think getting multiple opinions, not putting all your eggs in one basket, and asking your doctors why they have a certain opinion and trying to understand it. So then when you go to the next doctor and they give you a different opinion and you say, well, why do you think that? You see whether or not they're connected, or maybe they say something that then spurs you, like Mike said too. We forget things that happened. He said that he had a tick bite 4 years before that he had forgotten about. You know, sometimes you're sitting in the chair and they're saying, oh, well, I think maybe it's connected to this or that. And it reminds you, oh crap, I do remember that. That happened to me 2 years ago. And then by sharing that experience, it can even add more.
And you just by you bringing that up as a reminder, and even when Dr. Kehoe was discussing it, is nothing really shows up immediately where we think of a cause and effect right away, and we look for that effect right away to say, well, this is the reason why I slept badly or ate badly. But you know, it's something that reality is these things can show up years down the road before you even detect it physically in your own. And so, you know, one question I had for you too is after Dr. Kehoe, you know, put you on a detox, and I'm sure you were already working with practitioners in Sound Clinic. What was the hardest things that you found yourself struggling and changing in your own personal life, like, and having to follow through to ensure that you were getting success as you're working with Dr. Kehoe?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this too is ownership of the patient to take responsibility to follow through. You know, you can go to the doctor and they could say you should do this 3 times a day, and you shake your head like, oh sure, yeah, right, and then you go home and you do it maybe once a week, and who loses? You lose. The patient loses, right? Because I'm the one who's sick. So for me, you know, honestly, one of the hardest things for me was to get my friends and family on board to be supportive, to be understanding that I might cancel on you last minute, and it's not because I don't want to see you. It's because I legitimately don't feel well quite frequently, and it's really hard for people to accept that. You know, when you get sick once or twice a year, that's one thing. When you're constantly canceling on people, it's really hard for them. So that was a big part of it, and just to have them understand too, you know, that I have all these random symptoms, and so to get them on board to accept that this is just kind of my life now. But yeah, just accepting what they told me is truth, having perseverance and belief that it was going to work, and as hard as it was, because it's not easy, detoxing is not fun, but to stick to the plan and see the end game, and no matter how much it sucked to go through it, to set deadlines, you know, a month or 2 months in advance, and to think, if I'm not better in 2 months from now, then I'll reevaluate. But for now, I'm just going to put my head down and I'm going to do it the way they told me to do it. So letting go of the control was a challenge.
Yeah. And so Dr. Kehoe, for yourself, I'm sure you see a gamut of different patients with different mindsets. Ones that are just like, hold my hand through a lot of it, and others that are just, can you fix me?
And others that are like, mold, you're full of it.
Yeah. And so, you know, what is it that you know, how are you navigating? I'm sure every patient is unique, but what is?
I mean, you know, I spend minimum an hour the first time I sit with the patient, going through what I call an interrogation that frequently they call the most thorough, history-taking experience they've ever had. Really trying to find out and asking questions that sometimes can be leading questions for patients to even start figuring things out, and explaining along the way why I'm asking these questions and what we're looking at. So I get a sense of where the patients are, you know, as I'm kind of going through that. What's their level of acceptance or denial, or whether they even want to buy into this or not. Right. It's a tough thing. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to see patients that have seen 20, 25, 30 other practitioners, sometimes more, prior to seeing me. And, you know, so they come in already expecting to be disappointed. They have a lot of PTSD associated with not only their illness, but how they've been treated in the illness along the way, and the failures along the way. So it's working with the patients and kind of saying, you know, where are you? I will frequently, with the very first visit, try to work hard on getting the gut in good shape. So, you know, I do that for 2 reasons. One, 70% of our immune system's in our gut, 85 if you include the oral cavity, the mouth. So if I can get them feeling better in the first 4 weeks to some degree, then I've already made some headway with them. But on top of that, if we're going to be dealing with detox, if we're going to be dealing with herbal tinctures or antibiotics or what have you along the way, we need the gut in good shape to be able to absorb and effectively, treat what we're trying to do and not be compounding issues as well. So, hopefully we have an early gain after that first visit, early success, and they come back in, and then now, as Kelly said, as the engineer mind, as much as anyone, that when you see black and white, sometimes, these patients have been told, you look fine, all your numbers are good, it's all in your head, and so they're offered anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants, sleep aids, because the practitioner doesn't know what else to do. Right. And so when all of a sudden now I do an extensive blood work evaluation as well, and I start showing them, here's some things that actually aren't normal, and as Kelly said, explaining the optimal values of labs, not just what the lab range is, and saying, this is, connecting dots for them. The more dots that I can connect for them, the more they buy in, the more they're willing to do it, and the better chance they will have to succeed, in my opinion.
Yeah. So there's how many why is it a problem that they are, obviously it's a problem when they've seen so many doctors before coming to see you. You've mentioned as high as 50. And so obviously there's a problem. Why is that even there to begin with?
Well, there's a combination of reasons. For one thing, the way to effectively treat Lyme disease is not taught in medical school. To treat Lyme disease, we're taught in medical school in our training that give a man doxycycline for 2 to 6 weeks, and that takes care of Lyme disease, and that's just basically not true. And not only that, if they have a tick bite, okay, if they have a rash and a bullseye rash, which a fraction of patients actually will see the tick or have a rash, and then they give the doxycycline, that's completely ignoring all the other possible co-infections. That's completely ignoring yeast in the gut, the mold toxicity concerns, heavy metals, other things. And so part of the problem is our medical training is not equipped for environmental medicine. Nothing about mold toxicity was ever covered in my medical training. I had to learn all of this post-doc. And quite honestly, for me, I learned it all because I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me and how do I treat myself. And oh, by the way, was then looking at all the patients that I'm treating that have Lyme disease at the time that were refractory to treatment, saying, okay, let's find out how many of these patients have mold, and it was virtually every single one that weren't responding well to treatment. So, the nuts and bolts of it is that our medical training isn't equipped for it. And the tough part about it then too is the patient will go, and the patient will ask Dr. Google, and then we'll go in, and a practitioner doesn't know how to evaluate. They'll run the Western blot, or they'll just do the ELISA scan, the antibody screen for Lyme, and they'll say, you don't have it. Well, the reality is that, probably well more than 50% of the time that's a false negative. They actually do, even though testing says it's not, but the practitioner doesn't know the difference. So we ruled out Lyme disease. I'm like, really? Okay, oh, by the way, there's 29 different types of Borrelia that can cause Lyme. Have you checked all 29? I kind of doubt it because most of them don't have accurate testing. So, it's tough because many of the practitioners just don't have the training or the understanding. And my kind of issue with some of them is that they don't want to take that next step and learn, take that next step. But it is what it is. And so there are more and more practitioners doing this line of work, but we're still way too few.
Yeah. Kelly, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add that, when you're going through treatment, when you've been sick for years and years, and you have this stuff deep in you, deep inside every single part of you, and you start treating it, it sucks, okay? My first doctor who diagnosed me said, well, Kelly, Lyme ain't no picnic, and she was right. So, when you're hurting, when you're detoxing, I got way more sick when I started treating than I had ever felt in my entire life. And I think a lot of it is also on the patients because a lot of people give up. A lot of people, it's hard. I was literally at the point where I was in tears half the time I had to take my meds because I just finally started to feel okay again. And then I know that I'm going to herx from this and it's going to make me feel crappy again for the rest of the day. But I also knew, again, I had my eye on the prize. I was looking, a year out, 2 years out. And I think that in society today, we all kind of have what I call an Amazon effect, where we want results tomorrow. You mentioned this too. We're looking for a solution that's going to make us better tomorrow. Well, when you've been sick for decades, It's just unrealistic to have that kind of expectation. So I think it's also on patients to be realistic with their goals, and again, have faith in that doctor. Muscle testing, my Dr. Kehoe had mentioned it, absolutely amazing. It's not very, I mean, as a scientist, it seems very unscientific when they do it, but I can tell you, muscle testing, my life was saved because of muscle testing and good practitioners who know how to do it. And I would absolutely put my life in the hands of a good doctor who knows how to do muscle testing far before I would any quantifiable blood tests. If I had the choice, if I got sick again and it was I get one or the other, I either get to do quantifiable blood tests or with a good practitioner. So I just want to mention that too, that, you know, getting rid of your past beliefs of what you think is the right way to do something and to give it time is really important.
Now I'm curious too, because we touched on this a couple times from Dr. Kehoe's perspective and then from yours, but how did you handle the mindset of being sick for that long and going to so many doctors and them saying, without so many words, that you're crazy, that this is all in your head?
It was really hard. I'm not going to lie about that. I thought at one point that I was crazy. I, for a while, thought this is all in my head. I am making this up, because so many people, friends, family, doctors, told me there's no way that this is even possible. There's no way that you feel like this, for years. And for years, I didn't have any answers. And so I was a 2-sport college athlete. I was a runner for 20 years. And I spent 5 years of the past decade of my life in bed 20 to 22 hours a day. I mean, I wasn't bedridden, I can get up, but I was so fatigued and everything hurt so bad that I just preferred to stay in bed because I felt better there. And yeah, I mean, I'm a successful business person. I was traveling all the time. I had this great life. And all of a sudden, I was in my bed all the time. So it was really hard. Very lonely. You know, and even, like I said, even to have the faith, to have the hope that I will beat this, to be here is amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I would imagine too, is at that moment, just like, how do you start to have conversations with your family and friends about what you're going through and helping them understand where you're at? And like you mentioned earlier, the support that they had to have, and with them not truly going through what you're going through, but for them to understand, like, oh, maybe it's all in Kelly's head or something like that. I would imagine, like, if that ever was a conversation that you really had to shift and help them understand too. And I think for people who are struggling with biotoxin illnesses, this is something that's true for them too, is finding family support.
Yeah, you know, and I'll say too, it's okay if you don't have family support. I didn't, which sucks. It made it a lot harder. I had myself. I lost most of my friends and most of my family. Sorry, it's really hard to talk about, but I'm better.
Definitely.
And if I may say, you know, that Kelly's story again there is not unusual. Once again, not only is conventional medicine not always equipped to evaluate properly, but then you have family members and friends who they're coming out of that same mold and that same mindset, and you know, they're saying, well, you know, I don't understand, why is this taking so long?
Right.
And you know, it's not, you know, like the give me a Z-Pack and make it all go away. This is a journey, and it's a difficult journey. And the lucky ones are the ones that have family members who are supportive and who do the research and find out what the patient is going through. But I've seen many families get, you know, alienate the patient. I've seen, you know, this come between husband and wife many times because one person has it, especially when it comes to mold. Mold toxicity, the susceptibility for mold impacts about 25% of the population. So family members may all have some similar symptoms. When it comes to marriages, you know, there's a good chance that one may and the other may not. And so, and for whatever reason, frequently women are more susceptible. It's more common for me to see a wife and the husband's looking at the wife going, what is wrong with you? And I'm hopefully, if they both came to the appointment, I can explain she has, cursed genetics and you don't. I mean, and it truly is that simple, that as you breathing these toxins, your binding capacity to bind it in the liver, dump it in the colon, and remove it through your bowel movements is effective. However, 25% of us don't have that. And so, it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of barriers to treatment, but one of the hardest is when family, friends don't buy in. And it can be a very lonely and isolating thing for the patient.
Absolutely.
I would like to add a little bit of positivity to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Well, first of all, Kelly, it's so bold of you to be able, and so beautiful of you to be able to share. And this is, I think others out there want to be able to hear this too. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just think it's important to know that even without that support, you can still do this.
Yeah.
You don't have to have somebody holding your hand to do this. You can do it for yourself like I did. I love myself more than I ever thought possible. Sorry, getting emotional again. But, I never knew how strong I could be. So I just think that that's really important.
Well, and again, another thing that I try to help patients understand from the very beginning is, I will frequently tell them halfway through the appointment, first appointment or what have you, I've known you now 30 minutes, 45 minutes, what have you. It would be awful egotistical for me to sit on this side of the desk and say, I absolutely know what's going on. This is what's going on with your body. You're the expert on you. You always will be. And I constantly encourage patients to listen to that little voice that call it women's intuition, God speaking, your conscience, your soul, whatever you want to call it. If a practitioner is telling you, well, all it is this, and you're like, I just think there's more, you have to listen to that little voice. And I tell them, even if I'm asking you to do something and you don't feel like it's right, I want you to speak up and tell me, because you have to honor your body, you have to honor your soul and your voice. And it will frequently, how many times do we not listen to our little voice in whatever, medical or otherwise, and we regret it down the road? So I know in my own experience with myself, as well as working with patient after patient, I constantly, that's why I tell them, I don't mind you going to talk to Dr. Google. I don't like you doing it at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, ruining a good night's sleep. However, you and I are a team to get you better. And so why should I be threatened by you researching your own topic? Patients bring me answers to their own questions all the time. I just have to be smart enough to shut up and listen sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important, hugely important piece for a number of reasons. One, just establishing, I think, trust in between the doctor and the patient again, because the same thing in our office. We see people come in that have been to countless other doctors and have been told, oh, well, it's all in your head, you're crazy, or whatever else, and then we can figure out certain things that are going on that need to be addressed. But also, I think that really empowers the patient to take responsibility for their own illness, which I think in a lot of these things, they probably have put that off down the road. Kelly, as you mentioned, you're maybe the average human being eating things that really aren't good for you, that are polluting your body, and to be honest, you're building this disease inside yourself until it finally reaches a boiling point that you can't deal with it anymore, and then you got to change your life, right? So I think that's hugely important to give power back to them, saying, no, look, listen to that intuition, because it may not always be right, but it's never wrong.
So how are we, as practitioners and lay people, like patients or potential, how do we start to have a conversation that's not being had right now with doctors, or perhaps even to consider and look at our own personal lives, like even listening and learning from you, Dr. Kehoe, is just like, what's going on in my own personal life and choices that I'm making that maybe I'm struggling and I'm not really connecting the dots. Like, how can we start to have a conversation?
So, I mean, I think, forums like this are definitely, beneficial. There are, if patients, I know over the course of the last year, it seems like there's these summits that are going on every week that are free for the person, the patient to kind of view, and then if they want to buy the things at the end, they can. But every week it seems like there's 2 or 3 more, and so that's a great resource as well. As far as changing conventional medicine, that's going to be a slow-moving ship, because it means changing the medical degree programs, and although some programs are slowly starting to, it's an insurance-dominated model, And one of the big other barriers that patients have for Lyme and co-infections and mold and environmental medicine in general is that, does my insurance pay for it?
Right.
And that's a critical one, because sometimes the patients, especially if they've been lost their job, or they're having to figure out another place to live, these are hard life issues they have to cope with. But the sooner, what I'm telling them is that you can look at, I'm trying to do this all through insurance. That's one way to approach it. However, it's probably not going to be highly successful. I know there are a few clinics, and Sound Clinic happens to be one of them, that does accept insurance to treat these issues, but most across the country are going to be cash pay, and so it's tough. It is a barrier, but there aren't a whole lot of clinics that I've seen that insurance will cover these things, and so it's you pay now or you pay later. I mean, you're sacrificing your health year after year after year because you don't want to do things that insurance doesn't cover. I get it. It's a difficult conversation. Right. But and the other piece, as Kelly mentioned, this is not, you take a pill and you make it all go away. This is a journey. Even if you go to the right practitioner from the very beginning, you're probably looking at not only a couple years of treatment. Now, you should be feeling better along the way, but you're also looking at lifetime adjustments. Kelly has described this before as what her new normal is. And you have to figure out what are the steps that I need to take, and diet is absolutely critical to this, because if you don't have a healthy diet, I like in the example I'm saying, please picture yourself, your body, as a high performance Italian sports car. Are you going to go to the gas pump and put in the cheapest gas possible, or are you going to put in the high test? Right. And your body will respond. It's more expensive, it's more difficult, but it is a fundamental step that patients can take while they're doing things, just by going gluten-free many times, because again, mold causes gluten intolerance. So just by going gluten-free, likely dairy-free, and switching, it's hard. Trying to ask a patient to change their diet is hitting them right where they live, and they don't want to do it frequently. Kelly had already done a lot of these things, so but that's hard. That's a difficult step, because they don't. It's not always easy, and so that sometimes patients will self-select out and say, I'm not willing to take those steps. Right. That's their choice.
So, does biotoxin illnesses like Lyme disease or mold exposure, does it ever go away? Is it 100% healed? Is what people look for. So
I do believe it's possible for you to completely clear Lyme disease, Babesia, Bartonella. I don't think it's easy. I will say that when I was trained in muscle testing, it helped me dig and search at a deeper level and find some residual infections that were still there that perhaps more than likely prior to, once the symptoms went away, I'd say, okay, we're done, let's just watchful waiting. And so we often may have stopped the protocol too soon. I think it is possible for you to clear, but again, I think it is difficult. Mold, it is absolutely possible to detox all the mold out, but it might be several years in just kind of sticking with it in a gradual, safe detox manner. However, we have to be careful to say, are you ever going to go back to your normal? You're probably, once you crash, once your immune system crashes, you're not going to go back to where you were before, because you can go back to healthy, but it might have, with a healthier diet, better sleep patterns, more stress reduction, other things along the way, because you'll have other things that'll spin off, diabetes insipidus from the antidiuretic hormone deficiency, histamine intolerance from the mast cell activation syndrome that can both spawn out of toxic mold exposure. You can detox all the mold out, but now you have these two separate entities that still have to be addressed. And so, you can absolutely get better and get well. It's just not going to probably look like it did before you got sick.
Which most likely comes from some poor habits that got you sick in the first place, I would imagine.
Undoubtedly, we're probably contributing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kelly, what does that look like for you today after working with Dr. Kehoe? And how long have you worked with Dr. Kehoe, seen Dr. Kehoe for care in general?
So I've been working with Dr. Kehoe for about 2.5 years now. from a patient perspective, your question about how do we make things better, I think it would be really great if more people would be vulnerable and honest about their journey and what they went through. It's not fun to tell people that I had hardship, like with my family, but if it helps somebody else get through it, and if it allows for that conversation to happen more easily for someone else's journey, then it's worth it. And if more people spoke up to talk about those things, and if they weren't so taboo, in addition to that, any type of biology is sometimes gross. We need to be open about it and talk about it, and hopefully it will help prevent somebody else from having to endure whatever we went through. So I think that that's really important. My life is very different than what it was, but I am much happier. I got the toxicity out of my life. Both from my diet. I've stopped drinking. I used to drink all the time. I was very unhappy. I was very depressed. I think part of that was also influenced because of the mold and Lyme. I think part of it was just influenced because I just think as a society, I think that's a big part of it too. What our society considers normal is not necessarily good, healthy habits. So, I think having a little bit of a reason to get a swift kick in the butt to, change gears a little bit, it's not necessarily a bad thing. So I eat tremendously healthy. I never miss working out. I'm going to be 40 this year. I know a lot of people who are my age who don't work out because they quote unquote don't have time. For me, it is one of the biggest priorities in my life. So, having that agenda and having the opportunity to live the next 50 years of my life much more healthy than I think I would have otherwise been is just tremendous. I'm grateful for having had the experience. I'm really grateful to wonderful doctors like Dr. Kehoe for helping get me through it. But I will forever be better off having this in my history.
Oh, I just, you had mentioned when we had talked, it's just how Lyme has shifted you for the better. And I can hear that too in just how you're sharing your story. So thank you for sharing that. And you're very true in the sense we all need to be open and all need to have vulnerability show up to be able to have a conversation and know that it's safe. And then I think it's also, as practitioners, being open to ask deeper questions too. To start to invite conversation, I think, what I'm learning from you in this too.
Yeah, and just to make it comfortable. There are topics like I mentioned on this podcast, I had a lot of yeast infections for years because I had mold, and people don't want to talk about that kind of stuff because for whatever reason, like it's biology, it happens. And, there's more than just that. So I just think it's really important, especially for practitioners, to hold the space for a patient to feel comfortable to talk about those uncomfortable things that maybe they're not used to talking about. But also for patients to, kind of accept the fact that, hey, if something's off, maybe I should find the reason for it.
I think once we get out of here, I'm going to have to get t-shirts made that says biology is gross.
Hey, as a chronic illness patient for 10 years, I can tell you, there is some gross stuff with biology. So.
Well, we have a few minutes, and I want to be able to leave space to let people know where to find you as well, too, find both of you. Is there any last message that you want to be able to leave for our listeners that you want them to really take away from all of this conversation today? And we'll start with Dr. Kehoe.
Well, I alluded to it earlier that, I encourage patients, I want patients to follow that little voice, to follow their instincts. And with that being said, don't allow, if your primary care is unwilling to look at things for you, get a new primary care. If you go to a specialist and they rule these things out, but your belief is, after watching podcasts, watching these seminars, listening to people who've gone through this, going into blogs and support groups like Kelly works with, if you think there's more to the story, don't give up. Keep going, follow your little voice. You're the expert on you. You always have been, you always will be. And you will get answers if you're persistent. But if you just accept the antidepressant, the anti-anxiety medication, the sleep aid, and the pain medications, then that's pretty much what your future's going to look like as well too.
Thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, he nailed it. I'll just end with where you can find me. So I help run a support group on Facebook, Lyme Conquerors Mentoring Lyme Warriors, and we actually just launched LymeFriends.com as well. And Limestream is a video share platform for all videos about health. So that's what I'm doing.
I'll be sure to, for those of you tuning in to our Facebook Live page, I'll be sure to include those links in the comments section a bit later, but you will be able to access that as well too, and for sure be able to find Kelly that way. So thank you. And Dr. Kehoe, how can we best get in contact with you?
Sure. So I practice through the Sound Clinic, and there are offices in both Denver and Louisville here in Colorado, and currently doing a lot of telehealth appointments right now as well.
Fantastic. So we'll be able to post that as well in our comment section.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes today's show. We hope you guys enjoyed it. We certainly did, especially diving into really such a heavy, deep topic. But thank you both for sharing, for the vulnerability, for the information, and for everything. And so, Dr. Lynn, please close us out with the question we always ask.
Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 Fridays. Take care.